The setup for this waterfront wasn't because of Mashujaa Day. It was already being constructed because we want to convert the waterfront to align ourselves to the rest of the world who enjoy an oceanic view like we do, and try to make sure that both Kenyans and our visitors who come here enjoy this ocean view, where they can come do walk about, when they can come relax here, where they can come enjoy cultural activities. And this is not mainly done because of Mashujaa Day, but as we are aware, in the last few years, the president directed that we devolve celebration of national days from Nairobi to the counties. We have done a number of counties. This is the opportunity for Mombasa County, and what we have been doing in all the counties that we go and leave an infrastructure that can be used to host national days, as well as giving the citizens of those counties an opportunity to also enjoy the national celebrations. This one is for Mombasa and the coast region in general. You'll see a lot of flavor of the coastal people.
That is the interior PS, Karanja Kibicho. Is my audio okay now? Are we okay? All right, so that is interior PS Karanja Kibicho. That is part of what he tweeted on Monday at 17:11 on Twitter. This mother and her daughter drowned on Sunday at 6. The next day, Interior PS tweets and puts that video out. Zero mention of what happened to this mother and her daughter. Zero mention of recovery efforts. Zero mention of why these are concerned for the government. And that is why this evening we're asking, with relation to what happened in Mombasa and Likoni, where is the Kenyan government? Because you have Interior PS posting out a tweet, zero mention of what's happening in Mombasa. As we speak right now, we are yet to hear from the Transport CS, Macharia. And we're asking, okay, do lives matter in Kenya at all? So we're speaking to George Msamali, who's a security analyst. We're also speaking to Professor Alfred Omenya, who's a governance expert. Omenya, let me pass that question to you. So that is Interior PS. We're yet to hear from the Transport CS. We had a statement released by government spokesperson Oguna. Do you get the sense that the government really cares at all?
Yes, in fact, Linda, the juxtaposition of a country preparing to show its prowess in terms of military hardware, and right next, a mother and a child dead and helpless, I think is an excellent status of the country. We must ask ourselves more fundamental questions. Why do we have all these institutions? Do we have them for their own sake? Wouldn't this have been a spectacular moment for us to demonstrate the seriousness that we have when lives of Kenyans are involved? And what did we do? We basically demonstrated that, and through P.S. Karanja Kibichu's speech there, we've demonstrated that the lives of Kenyans don't matter. Because as you say correctly, he knew about this particular incident, but didn't mention anything about it a day later, but basically spent a lot of time demonstrating the wonderful things that the Navy is going to do before our president, so that we can be very proud of Kenyans. I'm not saying that that should not actually happen, but all I'm saying is that when lives of Kenyans have been affected, the response by government is always this knee-jerk reaction, and you don't get the feeling that we actually have a government that cares for its people. On this particular site, let's look at this particular site. 1994, we have 272 dead people. All these institutions, what I think is Kenya Ferry Services that wasn't there, and the Coast Guards that came later, and there was all sorts of opportunity to build capacity, to have response and these things. After that, we've had a number of incidences. the International Maritime Organization comes and tells us that basically the 3 ferries, MV Kenya is not up to scratch in terms of offering the services. MV Kilindini should be decommissioned, and this Harambe. A few years after that, we have MV Kenya drifting dangerously with more than 1,000 passengers on board. It had mechanical issues. We're lucky that that disaster did not happen. And you know, Linda, 2 people are dead, but think of the number of people who crossed this particular Kilindini Harbour. And we're talking about anything in the neighborhood of 200,000 Kenyans. On the basis of this reaction, do we feel that we have a government who cares for this population? Honestly, myself, I was in shock to hear that there were actually no lifeguards on this on these ferries and divers. That would take us common sense. Of course, first and foremost, we expect that those accidents will happen anyway, because the vessels themselves are really not seaworthy. And then secondly, of course, just the sheer numbers of people that they carry. Of course, they overload and do very many different things. To hear that there's no precaution when accident happens, and number 2, to hear that there's actually no response when accidents happen in this particular area, where we expect accidents to continue happening. They've been happening, they will continue happening. I think it's a major indictment on government about the seriousness with which government takes you know, the lives of Kenyans. There's some particular incidents that we say are once off. I mean, like the pipeline fires, of the schools collapsing and so on.
Yeah.
But in this particular instance of the ferries,
there's a problem.
This is a place that is very vulnerable, and we expect accidents to continue happening just because of the sheer numbers of people involved, the quality of the hardware that we have in place there. To hear that there's actually no preparedness at all, to hear that there's nobody coordinating all these agencies that work in this extremely vulnerable area, is an indictment, honestly, on government. It's a government that has gone to sleep. It's a government that is callous. It's actually a government that is incompetent. It's a government that needs to look inward again and ask whether this is really what the Kenyans deserve, you know, as government institutions.
All right, hold on. So part of the agencies that are in Mombasa that essentially should have been working together on this is the Coast Guard that was launched by President Uhuru Kenyatta and the Kenya Navy. Msamali, I had this conversation earlier on in the day with you, and you're saying there's too much bureaucracy, and perhaps that is why Kenya Navy did not act as fast as they should have, and that is why Coast Guard may not be able to take up the responsibility that you want them to take. It's not even in their mandate in the first place. Talk to me about this too, the Coast Guard and the Kenya Navy.
As you've clearly put it out, there's too much bureaucracy. But what we need to be asking ourselves right now, did we have a threat and risk assessment done at the ferry? And if it was done, what were the recommendations? Because
okay, first of all, hold on. Yes, so that was done because yesterday we had this conversation and we spoke to Captain Barak Mtayani Zaunga. He's the acting head maritime safety, and he says they've raised all these issues. They've given the recommendations to Kenya Ferry, and somehow they're just not being implemented.
Yeah, so somebody was sleeping on the job. And if you look at the way we bring in the military, we bring in the Coast Guards, in case of such incidents, there's always bureaucracy because there are procedures that need to be followed. For example, what we need to look at, who are the first responders? And definitely the first responders should have come from the Kenya Ferry services. And then if there was need then, very quickly identified, yes, we have this situation here, we need to bring in the Kenya Navy. How are they to be activated? And this is where now we say we have a lot of bureaucracy. We saw it happening during the Garissa University attack, where we had the REC squad down here in Nairobi, and they did not have transport to Garissa. Yet we have military helicopters at Isili. So what we need now to question is, what can we do about this bureaucracy of engaging the military in civil duty? And I think what is awkward here is that we are using very routine ways of dealing with very unroutine incidents, because we can't plan for a disaster. And if it happens, how are we supposed to react? Do we have a multi-agency plan in case of a disaster at the Likoni Channel? And if it was there, why is it not active? In better practices, people need to have periodic drills, multi-agency drills. We have a disaster, how do we bring in the military? How do we bring in the Kenya police? How do we bring in other agencies? What we've been witnessing in Kenya is that anytime we have an incident of this nature, the first responders are always the Red Cross. And you will find that by the time they come in, things have already happened and things are already out of control. So I look at it this way. We can't very much blame the Kenya Navy. 45 minutes was good response time, bearing in mind the bureaucracy that is there in engaging them in civil duty. But are they properly resourced? Have they been doing regular drills with the management of the Kenya ferry so that we have an incident, they come in, we hand over the operations to them and see what can be done. So I think much, much more needs to be done in matters of disaster preparedness. We need to have a multi-agency team that works together all the time, carrying out threats and risks assessments. And also the public should be aware about these issues, because if you look at what happens at the Likoni ferry, we have clear safety rules. One, I know that pedestrians should allow the vehicles on the ferry first and then they follow in. But does that happen? We are told that passengers should alight from the ferry before the vehicle is driven onto the ferry. And once the vehicle is on the ferry, the driver should engage the handbrake and get out of the vehicle. Does that happen? We Kenyans also are supposed to, we carry the blame at some point, because we take safety procedures as unnecessary, very unnecessary, and we find that we are so busy that we find them to be some sort of disturbance. That should not be the case. So we should not only blame the agencies, but we should also look at it as a country. How are we supposed to react in case of disasters? How are we supposed to plan? How are we supposed to prepare ourselves? And when it happens, we should not be afraid, but we should be prepared, Linda.
Okay, so quick one. Where would you place responsibility on what happened in Likoni? Kenya Navy, the Coast Guard, Kenya Ferry, Kenya Post Authority, among these four? Msamali?
The first responsibility should be taken by the Kenya Ferry, because these are the people that are supposed to be responding to disasters when they happen at the crossing point. The Kenya Navy will come in and the Kenya Coast Guard will come in as second responders, and it will need time for them to be brought in and then be activated into solving the situation. So here I think the people that should solely carry the blame are the Kenya Ferry Services. They were not prepared, they did not plan for anything. The Mutongwe ferry disaster happened, we did not learn anything from that. Several incidents have happened at the Likoni crossing point. This is not the first one. Yeah? Have they taken preemptive action to make sure that if it doesn't happen, and if it happens, there's quick response to that incident?
I love that bit, quick response, and that is where Professor Omenya comes in. Professor, you were at the school that collapsed, and we ended up losing 8 students. And this is not the first time that we are seeing buildings collapsing, not just in Nairobi, but across the country. And looking at what happened in Likoni as well. And Msamali has alluded to the fact that we have gotten to a point where the government seems to have delegated its duties to Kenya Red Cross.
Yes.
So do you feel, or do you think, that there's a government in control in terms of making sure that its people are safe?
Yes. Linda, if you look at it, I mean, every government department, every public institution, including private institutions, must be responsible for public safety. And we expect that those safety and security standards exist everywhere. They exist for schools. They should exist for markets. They should exist for churches. They should exist for, the neighborhoods where we stay. They should exist on the roads. They should exist for, public infrastructure like pipelines and all those things. They should exist for ferries and other areas. So we expect, actually, that every single government institution, be it a county, in charge of markets, we expect that there will be minimum standards that guarantee public safety, and that will be enforced. And what is sad in a lot of these instances is that what you're seeing is the government itself flouting the regulations, where we ask ourselves that how did government approve this type of a school that was going to kill our children? The same thing that we're now asking in the context of the disaster at the Likoni ferry, that how does government allow its own institution to operate basically with no safety standards? And those are the same things that were being asked about the pipeline disaster earlier on, that how did government allow, and a government institution, allow an entire settlement to be built on basically a time bomb, and it actually indeed exploded. And we've seen this thing with Kenya Railways, where people bailed on the railways and so on, and you ask yourself, don't these institutions care about public safety? First and foremost, don't they have some basic guidelines in terms of how they operate to ensure that at least the public that they serve operate in safe environments?
Okay.
And this is expected in every single ministry, is expected in every single department, is expected in every parastatal. But is this the case? No, it's not.
Okay.
It's an indictment on government.
I hear you. That's a good place to end this conversation. And finally, on Twitter, and let me read something. Donald Kipkorir says, how can we allow a mother and a daughter to lie in the bottom of the sea over 48 hours and still run the ferry services normally? And why is KFS board and management still in office? Why hasn't the Minister for Transport resigned? What kind of moral degeneration is this? Allow me to leave this conversation at that point. And basically, we're asking again, where is the Kenyan government? We have been speaking to Professor Alfred Omenya, who's a governance expert. Thank you, sir, for your time. George Msamali, who's a security expert. And a big thank you as well to Moses Kuria, who spoke earlier on to our lead reporter, Duncan Khaemba. I'm Linda.